Okay, here is CNN's comments after the Trump speech.
Bring back our panel politics editor for theroot.com and Morgan State University professor Jason Johnson, and CNN senior political analyst and senior editor for The Atlantic, Ron Brownstein, and CNN political commentator and Donald Trump supporter Kayleigh McEnany. All right, good to see all of you. All right, so Jason, let me begin with you, because the bottom line message from Donald Trump, he wants to be able to promise as president of the United States to help reinvigorate Detroit, and really in large part to the entire African American community. He wants to help bring prosperity that hasn't been there for some communities. So was this a convincing argument and statement from Donald Trump?
That was the worst afternoon infomercial I think I've ever seen in my life. And that's all it was. It was an infomercial. It was an opportunity for the pastor. And I was looking this up on my phone. You can buy those same prayer cloths at the church. It was a commercial. It was a commercial for that local network. It was a commercial for that church. I was listening to hear Donald Trump actually explain a plan. And there was no plan. He said, I have a civil rights agenda. I don't see a civil rights agenda. Did he explain the civil rights agenda? I go to the Donald Trump website all the time. He specifically talks about how Mexico was going to pay for the wall. He specifically talks about what he wants to do about criminal justice issues. But I didn't hear a civil rights agenda when he sat there and talked to that church. So again, this was a big show. I'm sure that lots of people within the isolated Trump campaign think that they did a good job. This is not going to move the needle at all. And I think it was just an opportunity for different kinds of people to get free airtime, but nothing was accomplished.
And Kayleigh, do you believe the campaign will feel that it hit the mark?
Yeah, I think viewers can see for themselves. I mean, the applause that he got at that church, you know, it was so touching to me that he said, we are all brothers and sisters united by one God. That is something I deeply believe. I know it's something that he deeply believes. And we're in a very divided country right now. You know, this election has been tough on a lot of us. But to hear him say that and to hear the applause he got, I think speaks for itself. And to see that bishop give that beautiful cloth to him. I know I speak personally. It gets very tough in this election, you know, having to constantly be on the defense and to have him have those uplifting words. When you feel broken and down, God will lift you up, and to give him that personal Bible verse. That was a very touching, personal moment that we got a glimpse into, and it was a great moment for Donald Trump.
So to follow up on that, though, Kayleigh, you said we live in a very divided community, and you know there are a lot of people who say it's Donald Trump who has actually divided many communities with his campaign.
Yeah, no, there is an effort to paint him as a divider, to paint him as all of these horrible things, but he's not that. You know, his message of wanting to bring border security is one that's deeply important to a lot of Americans, hundreds of which have lost their children to people who shouldn't have been in this country. You can paint his message as divisive, not you personally, Fred, but the Clinton campaign, but I think it speaks for itself that he's not a divider, he's a uniter, and this church moment, I think you got a glimpse into that.
So Ron, he comes into this church, and the word choice that Donald Trump used, it sounds as though he wants to be a savior.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Look, it's better that he was there than he was not there. It is important that both parties are competing for the votes of all Americans, and certainly there are many areas on which it is reasonable for Republicans to say conditions could be better in the African American community, in the Hispanic community, and really, you know, every community in America. I was struck that his tone, and he was reading, there was not kind of that comfort freewheeling that you know, you often see at his rallies. I think it was an indicative of just kind of how much of a step into foreign territory this may have felt for him. Look, Donald Trump was not born today. He is dealing in the African American community with the legacy of things he has said and done for many years, and particularly his role in trying to delegitimize President Obama through promotion of the birther argument. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for him to make any meaningful progress at overcoming that. But having said that, I think it is better than not that both parties are trying to talk to this community.
And so, Kayleigh, is this a moment of rebranding? Is it the feeling from Donald Trump or his campaign that there were the many African Americans who have said that they feel very skeptical about him, in large part because of the birther movement that he helped, you know, commandeer, that he is rebranding himself, that people will forget that, and that this moment will help them see a new, different Donald Trump as it pertains to the African American community or people of color in general?
I think he's trying to show his heart to this community, and I know he does have a heart for the African American community. He was the first Republican candidate to stand on that stage and say that Confederate flag down in South Carolina needs to come down. He was praised by Jesse Jackson as a friend, and I know people like to dig into the past and whatnot, but he does have a plan. He wants to bring school choice to these communities that are badly hurting. He's standing in a city right now that has a 40% poverty rate, and he believes that his economic vision can change that around. So I think these are issues voters really care about, and I think he wants to bring it directly to this community. He was criticized for weeks for not going to a black church, for not going into these communities, and he's listening to voters, and he's responding, and he's doing it.
So Jason, is there too much looking back?
No. Let's be clear about a couple things. Number one, the African American church is the easiest place for any candidate to go to because black folk are going to clap politely. We actually call it a church clap, right? They're going to clap politely at anybody. So I'm not surprised that people clapped when Donald Trump was there. People are polite. They're in their Sunday best. But here's the thing. Voters have long memories. The African American community is still holding Hillary accountable for saying super predators 20 years ago. They're still holding Hillary Clinton accountable for things she said in the 2008 primary campaign against Barack Obama. You think black folk don't remember things that Donald Trump said 2 weeks ago? This is not looking at the past. This is looking at the present. And Donald Trump's own behavior, if this was supposed to be his signature moment of saying, look, what I have said in the past is not the man I'll be in the future, he blew it. Because there was nothing that he said today that indicates that he either wants to repudiate or disagrees or change what he said in the past.
So then, Ron, this is Donald Trump's moment. He was in the spotlight at this church and on national television here on CNN, but voters are still going to make their comparisons. Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton and third-party candidates. And some would say third-party candidates are gaining a lot more, particularly in recent weeks. But as it pertains to comparing these two major leading parties, voters are going to be looking at track record, and they're going to be measuring how their track record can amount to painting a picture for the future.
Right, and that's what I said. I mean, Donald Trump was not born this morning, right? I mean, Donald Trump has a long record on issues relating to really all of the growing diverse communities in America. And it is on that front where he is facing potentially historic deficits. I mean, if you look at polling, you have over 70% of voters of color saying that they believe Donald Trump appeals to bigotry or is biased against women and minorities in both the Quinnipiac and ABC Washington Post polls. That is a big legacy to be carrying. And he faces, as I've said before, the prospect of not only very large deficits among African Americans, but the widest ever among Hispanic Americans. The plan he put forward this week on immigration calls for massive cuts in the future in legal immigration, which would primarily affect the Asian American community, and it's entirely possible that he could face record deficits there as well. The challenge is going to be, I think, for the Republican Party, win or lose after this election, even if he can squeeze out a majority by mobilizing enough white voters who are uneasy with many of these demographic changes, can they repair the damage that is being done across the board in these growing diverse communities, all of which together will be a larger share of the electorate in 2016 than they were in 2012, and will be a larger share in 2020 than they were in 2016.
And so Kaylee, voters are going to be measuring who is most genuine. Simply put, that is the bottom line.
I think you're right. And, I would look to the Fox poll, which showed more than a majority think that the attacks against Trump, calling him a racist, are unfair, and likewise more than half think the attacks against Hillary Clinton, being called a bigot, are unfair. I think voters don't want to hear this tit for tat back and forth. I'm going to call you this and I'll respond by calling you this. I think you're right. It's who comes across as most genuine, but also who has the plan to better my family, to ensure that my child can get into a college and afford it, to better the economy, to make sure I have a job, to make my wages go up. There is a huge disparity between black and white wages that is so unfortunate. Look, the average white person makes $142,000, that's the net wealth, and the average African American makes $11,000. That's a disparity that shouldn't exist. It shouldn't exist, and Donald Trump wants to remedy that.
And I wonder, Kaylee, we heard Donald Trump saying, he just in the drive over, seeing the shops closed, and he says, that was heartbreaking to see that. He says, we're going to turn that around. But the flip side to that is he's a developer. He's somebody who has been in the business of vision, of recreating, etc. And won't there be people in Detroit who will say, well, where have you been all this time as a developer? We heard from Alicia Bell, commissioner with the county earlier, who said, he's a designer. He manufactures clothes. That stuff could have been manufactured right there in Detroit and other parts of the United States. So how does he answer to that when voters are looking at Who's being genuine? Who's being disingenuous? Who's being an opportunist or something else?
You know, Donald Trump was a private businessman. He's built a big company in major cities, built big hotels. But he did, you know, also he opened his doors, his office space in Wall Street to Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Bridge Coalition.
But we're talking about Detroit and his observations in Detroit, and we've heard from people who are there in Detroit who are saying, where have you been? You have, you know, you have the talent, the know-how, the intellect to make things happen. Why are you just now talking about it here in Detroit?
Sure, well, he hasn't been in politics. He hasn't been in a place to make change, but Hillary Clinton has, and the Democrats have, and President Barack Obama have, and the disparities have never been worse economically. So I think, you know, you can look to someone who's never been in politics and, you know, criticize him, but I also think that there needs to be a glaring look at people who are in charge of making public policy, and those public policies have failed Detroit and have failed this community.
Okay, we're going to pick up this conversation. We come right back, much more on the visit.
All right, so there's a look at CNN. I'm going to try to find some footage of Fox